Thank you, Rick Sandra. Uh, I declare open the plenary sitting of the 2021 spring session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. We're coming to the end of 4 days of substantive and fruitful discussions. It's my great pleasure to welcome back NATO Deputy Secretary Mircea Giona to our Assembly. Mircea, in just 4 weeks, NATO heads of state and government will meet in Brussels to chart a path for NATO's adaptation over the next decade. The alliance is at a critical juncture as it confronts the new reality, a world of systemic competition, autocrats in Moscow, Beijing, and elsewhere seeking to promote parallel norms, institutions, and autocratic-based alliances. These threaten to undermine the rules-based system we've sought to promote and defend since World War II. Meanwhile, other challenges put our societies at great risk, from terrorism to climate change to this pandemic. Over the last year, our Assembly has put forward concepts, ideas, and recommendations for how NATO needs to adapt to these challenges. And over the last few days, we deepened our reflections and refined our ideas and our recommendations. I'm grateful to the Secretary General and to you, Deputy Secretary General, for engaging the Assembly in the NATO 2030 reflection process. I know you, as a former parliamentarian and a member of our Assembly, recognize the importance of parliamentary and public support for our alliance. So as you prepare for the NATO summit, let me offer some thoughts about what the Assembly sees as key priorities. First, we believe we must reaffirm our unity and cohesion based on our shared democratic values. That's number one. Our commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law distinguishes us from autocratic alliances. Without it, we'd be just another military bloc. That's why it cannot be just a mantra that we repeat routinely in summit communiques. We must demonstrate we're serious about, and let me quote our founding fathers here, safeguarding the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. As an Assembly, we urge our respective governments to demonstrate this commitment concretely by establishing a Center for Democratic Resilience within NATO itself. I'm encouraged that the independent group of experts on NATO 2030 also saw the need for Center on Democratic Resilience when they reported that as a recommendation back to the Secretary General. As a further tangible contribution, our Assembly will vote later this morning on renaming our Committee on Civil Dimension of Security to the Committee on Democracy and Security. We can draw inspiration from our Swedish hosts. They were leading the way in promoting democracy at home and abroad and engaging the whole of society in the defense of our democratic values. The second priority, we believe we must respond firmly to Russia's destabilizing actions against allies and against our partners. A revisionist Russia continues to test our resolve and our unity. We must strengthen our collective defense. We must maintain a united posture that imposes costs and consequences on Russia's aggressive behavior. At the same time, we must engage Moscow in credible, serious, and clear-eyed dialogue when it's in our interest to do so. We must also stand up to Russia's ongoing aggression against Georgia, Ukraine, and other partners. We've condemned Russia's massive military buildup in and around Ukraine. It's reckless, irresponsible, dangerous, and unjustified. Moscow must bring its troops back to the barracks. Crimea, in particular, is the ultimate test of our resolve to defend the rules-based order. We must make clear that we will never recognize Russia's illegal and forcible annexation and occupation of Crimea. That's why our Assembly actively supports Ukraine's Crimea platform. Third, we must speak with one voice in relation to China. We must compete to preserve our competitive edge, counter where we must, and engage where we can, and where it is in our interest to do all of that. We must also reinvigorate NATO's partnership with like-minded democracies in the region. Many of them are represented here today. Fourth, we must complete our drawdown in Afghanistan, but we have to do so in a way that empowers our Afghan friends to chart their future course and preserve the important gains of the last 2 decades. This will allow us to adapt our counterterrorism efforts to reflect the evolving nature of the terrorist threat. Fifth, we must hold the line on defense spending and live up to the defense investment pledge made in Wales 7 years ago, including the 2% commitment. We cannot let China and Russia take the lead in today's technological race and let them define the future of warfare. I want to recognize your important work, Mircea, to ensure that the alliance maintains the technological edge and leads in setting norms and standards for emerging and disruptive technologies. Sixth and last, we must keep our door open to countries who seek to join our unique community of democracies. In today's new geopolitical confrontation, we should embrace rather than fear the transformative power of NATO's open door. I'm confident the summit will reaffirm, for example, that Georgia and Ukraine will become members of NATO and that our door remains open to Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. Dear Mircea, dear friends, our Assembly, including our bipartisan U.S. delegation, has played its part in keeping our unique transatlantic link strong throughout turbulent times. The NATO summit offers a unique opportunity to open a new chapter and reinforce NATO as the enduring embodiment of the bond between Europe and North America based on our shared democratic values and our collective security. This Assembly stands ready to play its part in supporting NATO's important adaptation and continuing to build public support for the alliance. After the summit, we look forward to being an active participant in updating the strategic concept. With this, let me stop and formally welcome Mircea Giona, Deputy Secretary General of NATO. Mircea, I want to thank you, if you could join us on the screen, for your leadership and your friendship. Thank you for joining us today to preview the agenda for the summit. We very much look forward to the discussion. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much, President Connolly, for this very kind but also very forceful introduction. And let me take this opportunity to again congratulate you on your appointment as President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. We count on your leadership, on your wisdom, and we count on the entirety of the Assembly to continue to be our indispensable partners in forging the way forward for our great alliance. Let me also thank Karin Enstrom and the Swedish delegation for formally hosting this spring session. We all look forward to the moment when we can meet again in person. And thank you for reminding me the wonderful moments I spent as a Romanian MP in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. It's a great group of leaders, and my heart and also my full support and Jens Stoltenberg's support is in our ever closer relationship with this very assembly. Because that's indeed a very important year for millions of citizens from allied nations, and also for the so many partners that this assembly represents. Not least, as we start to turn the tide in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic, this is also a pivotal moment for NATO, as Jean, you have also said. As we look forward to the summit in Brussels in just 4 weeks' time, we are very happy to welcome in person President Biden and all the leaders of the alliance. We must seize this unique opportunity to reinforce our unity and solidarity, accelerate our ongoing adaptation, and prepare our alliance for the future. And this is why Secretary General has launched NATO 2030, and we welcome the input coming from the Assembly on the reflection process, and we look forward to engaging with you on the way after the summit, up to the 22 summit, as we'll be updating our strategic concept. Because indeed, since 2014, NATO has taken significant steps to adapt to a changing security environment. We have strengthened our collective defense, we boosted our readiness of our forces, modernized our capabilities, and we did increase defense spending. But to stay successful, NATO must continue to adapt to today's and tomorrow's challenges, to deal with a world of growing global competition, advancing authoritarianism, and continued instability in NATO neighborhoods. Looking to 2030, we face increasing challenge and change. As we are drawing down in Afghanistan, we are stepping up our response to other global challenges. From Russia's pattern of aggressive behavior to brutal terrorism, even more sophisticated cyber attacks, disruptive technologies, climate change, and indeed, the rise of China. All of these challenges are too great for any country or any continent to face alone. But together, through NATO, the nations of Europe and North America are not alone. And together, we are adapting again to face a more unpredictable world. In a nutshell, this is what NATO 2030 is all about. At our summit in June, we'll have an ambitious and forward-looking agenda to strengthen our unity and commitment to defend each other, to broaden our approach to security, take a more global approach to safeguard the rules-based international order, and yes, as you have mentioned, President Connolly, to recommit to our shared democratic values. To strengthen our cohesion and unity, we must use NATO even more as the principal platform for transatlantic consultations on security and defense. We must further strengthen our alliance as the foundation of our collective defense by keeping levels of defense spending up and our deterrence and defense posture strong. We also need to broaden our approach to security by focusing, among others, on resilience and innovation to ensure that our societies, supply chains, and infrastructure are more resilient, and to retain, indeed, our technological edge in an ever more competitive world. We must also address the security implications of climate change, a defining challenge that has a profound impact also on our security. So NATO can and should play its part in reducing global emissions. Finally, NATO 2030 is about safeguarding the rules-based international order against those who seek to undermine it, like Russia and China. So we should deepen our partnerships and forge new ones with like-minded countries and organizations from around the world to set international standards and norms that reflect our values and ensure others play by the same rules. At the summit, I expect allies to task the Secretary General to update our strategic concept dating from 2010 and to chart a common course going forward. The challenges to our shared security are great, so our ambitions must be high. Meeting our level of ambition requires more resources. For this, allies must continue to spend more and better on defense. We should also collectively fund more of NATO's core tasks. Over the years, we have agreed to do substantially more together, from collective defense to crisis management and to cooperative security. But common funding did not keep up with these increased tasks. A substantial increase in common funding would send a powerful political message of cohesion and resolve. And for this, our leaders will need your support as representatives of our democratic nations. These NATO 2030 priorities will form the core of an ambitious and forward-looking agenda for the summit on June 14th. It will be a unique opportunity to future-proof our alliance, to re-energize the transatlantic bond, and to demonstrate our commitment to transatlantic solidarity, not just in words, but in deeds. NATO 2030 is also an important opportunity to recommit to our values, strengthen our democracies, and protect our institutions and values. This starts with you, the defenders of our democratic ideals and the linchpin between our elected governments and the people you represent. So thank you again for your ongoing commitment to our alliance. Thank you for your interest and active engagement in NATO 2030 initiative. And thank you for ensuring that our resources match our levels of ambition. We all look forward to a very successful summit in June, and we are confident that this will be the case. And then we'll have together again to continue to successfully adapt our alliance through NATO 2030, to keep our people safe, to safeguard our values, and to make sure, as President Connolly has so aptly said, that we're not just a military alliance, but we are an organization based on a foundation of principles, of shared values, of rule of law, of democracy, and of course of shared interests. So like always, I'm privileged to be with you, and I look forward, I know, to a very lively discussion in the next few minutes. Thank you so very much. Congratulations, President Connolly, for your leadership. We count on our partnership and friendship.
You certainly have that, and thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, for your very thoughtful remarks. We're now going to open it to questions. I'm going to ask everyone to limit their question to 1.5 minute time limit so that we can try to get everybody in. And I'm going to call delegates to ask questions in groups of 3, if that's all right with you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General. And after the questions have been asked, we'll, of course, ask the Deputy Secretary General to reply. The first 3 questions are from Attila Mesterhazy from Hungary, Marietta Giannakou from Greece, and Linda Sanchez from the United States. Attila.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation, Mr. Jonah. Good to see you again. And I have just a short question that could you tell me something about the Western Balkans? What are the next steps for Kosovo or Bosnia? So if you could just elaborate something on this issue, that how we can go on, how we can do the next steps for that region. It's quite important for us as a security issue, of course, and as a Hungarian politician, of course, it's very important for me personally also. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Attila. Marietta.
The international order faces is the threat to democracy and the rule of law, NATO's core values along with individual liberty. However, in contrast to the European Union, which is arguably in a better position to address democratic backsliding through a number of tools at its disposal, NATO has no legal provisions for suspending or expelling an ally who violates the alliance's founding principles. Also, the fact that NATO operates by consensus means that any punitive action against the offending ally risks incurring retaliatory action on other NATO business. What do you think must be NATO's role in helping defending democracy and thus strengthening democratic resilience?
Thank you very much, Marietta. And Linda Sanchez, you get the 3rd question.
Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary General. What a pleasure to hear from you. We've been talking about a lot of themes, and the theme of resiliency is one that continues to come up. Would you agree that through NATO 2030 the NATO 2030 reflection process, NATO must rededicate itself to one of its core founding mandates, which is a commitment to shared democratic values? And if so, what are some of the proposals NATO is considering to make democratic institutions in allied and partner nations more resilient against threats to liberal democracy? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Mr. Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you so much for the questions. Attila, my good friend, good to see you again. As President Connolly also has mentioned, NATO is a vivid example of adaptation and open door policy. And we are very, very happy to see 2 of the newest allied members, the Republic of North Macedonia and also Montenegro, joining our ranks. Today, Secretary General Stoltenberg is meeting the President of Serbia. We are working together with the European Union on Bosnia and Herzegovina. So our interest and our focus on the Western Balkans remains very, very strong. And we hope also that the pattern, positive pattern of successful and successive enlargements of NATO first and EU following after will also be completed in the Western Balkans. Each of us, starting after the fall of communism, all the enlargements of NATO, it was joining NATO first, the first 3 countries in 1999, 7 of the countries in 2004, and so on and so forth. And then after a relatively short period of time, NATO enlargement was also conducive for European Union enlargement. So in our view, the Western Balkans belong, and if the nations in that region want to join the Euro-Atlantic family of communities, we should support them. And this is what we are doing every day, and we're trying to complete the work of a Europe whole and free and democratic. Now, speaking of our values, this is an alliance based on common values and also on common interests. And of course, being an organization that works on consensus, not every single time we see eye to eye on every single issue. But we cherish all our allies, and we try to make the political role of NATO even stronger. And when there are differences, the unique platform that NATO represents for also bringing things that allies sometimes do not see eye to eye, that's why we encourage nations to bring to the NATO table issues that are pertinent to their security, but also we discourage nations to bring on the NATO table all the issues that sometimes do appear in their bilateral or regional relationships. As you have mentioned, we have no instruments per se in basically looking into the implementation of these standards. But I think there is a sort of a positive peer pressure, and there's always a desire among all allied nations to preserve this unity. We cannot have unity without a common foundation of values and a common foundation of joint interests. We're also working very closely with the European Union. We work together with the EU on fighting disinformation, fighting lots of fake news and propaganda that is coming from all over the place. But I think the NATO 2030, in essence, is the reconfirmation, and one of the proposals that we are making is for this summit or the next summit, a strategic concept, to have basically a solemn reconfirmation to our values. And I think this is very important, and I believe this is something which is also leading the way towards keeping NATO united, cohesive, and also based on the same strong foundations of democracy, rule of law, and respect for individual freedoms. Now, when it comes to Representative Sanchez, I think our leaders in NATO were very much anticipating the trends in global affairs, because we started to work on resilience in 2016, and our leaders decided to task NATO to work on what we call baseline requirements on resilience in Warsaw at the summit. So it's already 6 years, 5-6 years. This is why at the NATO 2030 and the NATO summit, we are proposing even more ambitious and more precise indicators to measure our resilience. And of course, that's a national prerogative in all our countries. But we believe that the body of experience that NATO has really developed over time in identifying societal resilience, which encompasses much more than the traditional military definition of resilience, is something that we should all do. Also map our more vulnerable points. If there are some issues that are in terms of our supply chains, in terms of our FDI screening, in terms of foreign ownership, when it comes to telecom and 5G, when it comes to energy security, when it comes to democratic resilience. These are issues that are basically a much broader definition of both security and also resilience. This is why we are welcoming the fact that many allied nations and partner nations, like Sweden and Finland, my home country of Romania has proposed recently a Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience, looking also into the democratic side of these things, are things that we encourage. And we know that we'll work with your assembly just to make sure we mature this conversation as we move forward. We are also leading, and the SecGen has asked me to also look into NATO-EU relationships. We have identified resilience as one of the topics for additional partnership between NATO and the EU. We hope to be able to have a high-level dialogue on resilience between NATO and the EU. And I do believe that bringing also institutions and partners that share our values into such a conversation is something which is very, very useful. We take the issue of resilience very seriously. It's a very broad concept. It's a combination between national, subnational governments and international organizations. And it's more and more a matter of societal resilience and not a whole of government resilience. So we count on you, because you also feel the pulse of your public opinions and your societies, to help us craft the most precise, the most effective, and the most, if you want, synergistic approaches to resilience. And we count on your support and your political leadership in this.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. I would just add I hope it's very clear. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly believes that while expressions of support, of course, for democratic values and resilience are important, we believe it has to be institutionalized. After 70 years, it is time for NATO institutionally to have a locus and a focus on what does it mean to share democratic values. What are those institutions? What are best practices? What kind of benchmarking can we and should we do? What kind of resources can we make available to member nations and would-be members? And we believe that has to be actually institutionalized in NATO, that it can't just any longer be a verbal commitment or, an expression of universal buy-in. And frankly, from the American point of view and many others, after the experience we went through on January 6th, what is very clear is that we cannot take those values for granted, even in democratic societies. There are threats both from within and without, and we need to defend those values in a way that is as rigorous as for 70 years we've defended our collective security. The next three questions are Karl Lammers of Germany, Osman Bach of Turkey, and Ado Silva of Portugal. Karl.
Yes, thank you, President Connolly, for your opening, and thanks for your address, Deputy Secretary General. My question addresses Afghanistan. The peace process underway in Afghanistan is to be welcomed, although it is recognized complex and evolving process requires careful monitoring. What role do you see for NATO in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of military forces?
Thank you, Karl. Osman Bach of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chibri.
Do you hear me?
We hear you, Osman.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you, Mr. President.
We can hear you, Osman.
Yes, thank you, dear Deputy Secretary General. Thank you for your presentation. I want to bring the situation in Middle East to your attention. There is a fire in the Middle East. Every day, dozens of children are dying. Innocent civilians are being killed in Gaza. Currently, the humanitarian situation in Gaza, it's alarming and it is deteriorating every moment. We must put out the fire immediately. We must at least think of innocent children and civilians. My question is, what role can NATO play in order to de-escalate the situation? What should individual allies do? Thank you.
Thank you, Osman. And the final questioner in this set is Adão Silva of Portugal.
Sorry, we're just having a technical issue. If we could ask Mr. Silva to request the floor again. And we'll bring you. So we're trying to bring Mr. Silva up. Yeah.
I see him now.
Mr. Deputy Secretary General of NATO, I take this opportunity to ask you for your comments on how do you think the transatlantic relation will evolve in the coming years. Do you consider that the cooperation in the Atlantic will be strengthened? I would like to point out in this regard that the Azores, and particularly the largest field in Azores, may play a pivotal role in enhancing the cooperation in the Atlantic due to its unique geostrategic position and the contribution it can give to the reinforcement of NATO's capabilities in the Atlantic Ocean. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adão. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much. And President Lammers, so good to see you, sir. I remember your visit to Romania when I was president of the Senate in Romania, and the Parliamentary Assembly visited my country. Listen, we have invested so much in Afghanistan for already 20 years. And if a decision to leave with our forces Afghanistan was something that was coming, one or another, you just cannot be open-ended in such complicated situations. But even if we leave, and we are now in a very deliberate and orderly way moving our troops out, US forces, NATO forces, partner countries' forces, and that's a very important process. We are not leaving Afghanistan per se. Afghanistan will continue to be for NATO, and I know that for the international community, a destination for our permanent attention and support. As we speak, we are drafting potential ways in which NATO would eventually continue to be of support for the Afghan national security forces, like we have done successfully over years. We are, of course, interested in making sure that the progress on women's rights, on girls' rights, on things that were achieved with great sacrifice and treasure and blood by so many of us, coming in support of our American allies after 9/11, will not be wasted. So what we know, this is a complex moment. We are not shying away from the fact that there are also risks there. We all know about those things. All of us should encourage an inter-Afghan peace process and dialogue, and also the international community, NATO, our partners, the other players in the international arena, the regional players around Afghanistan. We all have an interest in making sure that Afghanistan is not becoming again a safe haven for terrorism, but just the opposite, a responsible and respected partner of the international community. There's so many things that can be done. There's so many things that we can open this country and that region for commerce, for investment, for trade, for stability and security. It's not easy, but the fact that we are withdrawing the Resolute Support Mission and we are putting an end to this already 2-decade-long international operation and NATO operation in Afghanistan does not mean the end of our interest and support, active support, generous support, synergistic support for this country, which is a linchpin for stability and security for a much broader area. Now, speaking of the Middle East, of course, NATO has, and the situation now in in Israel and in the territories. NATO is not involved directly into this. We also call for restraint and de-escalation. There are many allied nations that are now, as we speak, trying to be supportive of such an effort. It's a very important discussion for the broader implications for stability in the greater Middle East. This is something that we also are joining our voice, asking for restraint, asking for de-escalation, asking for resumption of dialogue, because in the end, that's the only way to forge a political solution for a very complex and long-standing issue. Now, when it comes to the importance and the strategic importance of Portugal, of the Azores, let me give you just one example. One of the most important NATO exercises in years, Steadfast Defender, just started in the Atlantic on the shores of Portugal. And this is a massive operation, a NATO operation, a NATO exercise, also a US led exercise that will be going from the Atlantic all the way to the Black Sea. I'll be present at the end of Steadfast Defender in my country, my home country, Romania, just for the closure of this very big military exercise. But when we speak about the future of the alliance and also cohesion and unity, we also are now working as we speak to the most important transformation of our concept of deterrence and defense in generations in NATO. Our military leaders, of course, upon instruction from our political leaders, are working on one of the most important 360 degrees analysis and adaptation of military planning to a very complex international situation. Not only from all geographies, east and west and south and north, but also across domains. As you very well know, now we have the fifth operational domain in NATO, which is space. Cyber was declared an operational domain in 2016. Of course, the traditional air, land, and maritime were already part of traditional thinking of this. So please stay assured that in terms of defending and protecting allied territory and population, we are very serious, and like always, NATO is leading the way in making sure that we always adapt to an evolving and more challenging international security situation. So this is also part of the process of adaptation on deterrence and defense, and the role of all NATO allies, larger, smaller, North Atlantic, Western European, Southern European, Eastern European, or Northern European, are equally important for us, and we are taking actions accordingly. And we appreciate the critical role that your country, Portugal, is playing in this direction.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Our next three speakers are Udeke Luoni from Estonia, Theo Franken from Belgium, and Christian Tybring Yede from Norway. Udeke.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, of this very interesting overview and presenting here to us. Still, dear colleagues, I would once more like to draw your attention to the most important change in security-related technology in 21st century, namely the development of lethal autonomous weapons. Such systems are gradually becoming central to contemporary military strategy, especially thanks to the leaps of AI field. Yet they create a moral hazard by incentivizing aggressive postures. The illusory perspective of less human casualties might blur military and political decision makers' choices and might deceive public opinions into supporting wars of aggression that are international crimes, as we all know, and are against all democratic values we share. So this class of weapons should be thoroughly regulated by the means of dedicated international treaty. And NATO Parliamentary Assembly could create a special report on this matter. But for example, we could start with having international conference on this. Why not together with North Atlantic Council? So I would love you to comment on this issue and how the NATO in future could dedicate more time and effort on this regulation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radecki. Theo Franken.
Yes, thank you, President, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General. You're hearing me? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, perfect. So maybe four little questions or points. First of all, on Afghanistan, Professor Lammert already questioned you about issue. I want to point out one single thing about the Afghan interpreters and fixers for NATO for the last 20 years. In Belgium, but also in other NATO countries, we're talking about repatriate them and granting them visa. So is this a program that's what is the vision of NATO? What is your point of view? Is this an official question of NATO to do this? Because we're discussing this in Belgian Parliament as well. Second point is on Iraq. Where are we with the increase of troops in Iraq for the moment? So maybe you can clear that out. The 2 points I want to make as well. First on Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, we're very concerned about this also when we see all the problems in the Middle East. So can NATO more address their role in the Middle East and their role in international terrorism? The Vienna Agreement can be a threat as well. We cannot be naive on this point of view. So that's 3 questions or points I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo. And Christian.
Yeah. There. I just have to show you this ribbon, this Norwegian ribbon here. This is Norwegian Independence Day or Constitution Day today. So, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, you have to say hello to Jens and say that I hope that he is fine. Very good. My question is about the occupation of the Crimea and Russian occupation there. We have the same statements every time we meet, and we all agree on it. That's an illegal annexation or occupation of Crimea. But now it's 7 years now. And is there any progress in any way? I mean, like Russia is going to withdraw, and it also doesn't look like the people living in Crimea is very, well, I don't hear about this great protests or anything, but maybe you're not informed. Could you inform us on if that's an issue when you talk to leaders around the world in NATO about this issue and what they think of the future of the sanctions that we have now on Russia because of the occupation of Crimea? Thank you.
Deputy Secretary, I think it's important to remember that a little difficult to have, rallies and protests en masse in Crimea when they are occupied by Russian troops. And it's also important to know that it took 50 years for the Baltics to regain their independence from the then Soviet Union, and we stuck with them, and it paid off, and they're now members of NATO. So, a historic perspective is sometimes important with respect to things like this. And the final point we've made in NATO PA is if you somehow acquiesce or turn a blind eye to Crimea, then everything else is just quibbling over territory. Eastern Ukraine, Abkhazia and Ossetia and Georgia, Moldova, and anything else Putin may want to get his hands on. So it's one of the reasons why we've been so stalwart in making a strong line on Crimea. Just the other point of view that we have expressed in NATO PA over the years. Mr. Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you very much. The question on autonomous systems and AI and new technologies, we call them here in our jargon, emerging and disruptive technologies. It's a very critical and complex topic. I'm chairing the Innovation Board in NATO on behalf of the Secretary General, and I'm working with my colleagues to develop a roadmap on these new technologies. And AI is one of the most complex and actual topics that we are discussing. And I think you're right that when we speak about our values, sometimes we speak mainly about democracy, the rule of law in one specific situation. But when we speak about our values as a transversal issue and not geographical issue, we have to make sure that when we address the issue of military and security use of new technologies, AI in particular, that also our values are embodied in the way in which we operate and regulate the systems. Of course, NATO is not the European Union. We don't have the power to regulate things. But we have a fantastic power, which is the power of standard setting, because NATO is recognized around the world, including by the ones who do not like us that much, that we are representing the gold standard when it comes to military and security issues. That's why we are working very actively, also the European Union. We are also engaging with the UN, speaking of international treaties. If it's a global treaty, you need also the UN to be involved. And this is why we are very, very attentive in making sure that the adaptation and adoption of new technologies when it comes to military warfare and security issues is done with the respect of these fundamental democratic values that we embody. That's a very complex issue. That's a very important issue. And I welcome the interest of the Assembly in working with us in trying to find the right balance and the right way forward in something like this. The other issues that we are discussing on new technologies, other than AI and big data, and we have now a dedicated AI strategy in the making as we speak in NATO. There are other issues that are coming, like quantum computing. That's a massive transformation of everything we'll do, both in economic terms, in civilian terms, and military terms. There is a big conversation about biotechnology and human enhancement. There is, again, lots of issues when it comes to values, when it comes to norms, when it comes to the way in which we embrace this kind of new technologies. There is also the issue of space. There is also a lot of biotechnology is another big issue, and a new technology that is basically fundamentally shifting the conversation across our societies. So when we speak to democratic nations and to democratic parliaments in NATO and with our partners, we have to make sure that we keep our values at the heart of what we do. Now, when it comes to Afghanistan, of course, individual nations can and should take decisions. Is not a NATO policy per se, but we are very, very careful in making sure that there are not only military personnel, there are lots of civilian contractors, many of them in Afghanistan as we speak. We also have to make sure that the ones that we have trained and the ones we have invested in many corners of Afghanistan will be able to continue to operate safely. And this is something that, of course, we encourage. On Iraq, we have a decision to basically gradually continue to beef up our presence. We'll do it gradually in full accordance and only upon the request of the Iraqi government. So the NATO mission in Iraq is now in the process of adaptation. We are transferring some of the training education missions from the other big operation in Iraq. And also we are counting also on our partners, not only NATO countries, to contribute to the stability of Iraq, a very important country. When it comes to Iran per se, you know very well that we have lots of partnerships around the world. We have, I think, more than 40 partnerships around the world. We have a very strong system of partnerships in the Gulf region, which is called the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. We have a very important system of partnerships in Northern Africa, in the Middle East, which is called the Mediterranean Dialogue Partnerships. We are also working directly or indirectly with like-minded partners of ours, and of course with allies and other organizations, just to make sure that we find the best answer to the risk of terrorism and the risk of destabilization, which is unfortunately still very present in that region. Heavy anniversary to Norway. That's a great ally, not only because you're giving us this great SecGen, and I will convey to Jens your best issues. And I think President Connolly gave the best answer to the Crimea question. There's no way in which we will ever be moving away from our position of never accepting and making a huge political, strategic, and moral mistake to sanction such an illegal, immoral gesture from Russia against a sovereign nation. This will be opening a Pandora box for many things to come. So our position is very clear: never recognize this, making sure we help our Ukrainian partners in any possible way we can, helping our Georgian partners in the Black Sea to become stronger. And we count also on our partners, not only NATO countries, also on our partners to making sure that we help these partners of ours to withstand a massive Russian pressure. You've seen the recent build-up of Russia in and around Ukraine. They've left only partially. They retain a massive military presence in and around Ukraine. All of us have to be sure that we continue to support our partners and never accept such positions of diktat and imposition of force on sovereign nations. Never, never. And I think the parallel with the Baltic countries and the fact that the West America has never accepted, over decades and decades of Cold War and many problems, ever accepting an illegal deviation from the natural right of sovereign rights of nations to choose the alliances and the systems in which they want to operate. The spheres of influence for NATO is a word that doesn't exist in our vocabulary. We'll never recognize spheres of influence per se. We can recognize geopolitics. We can recognize situations that limit our action or influence sometimes, but never, as a principle, accept the diktat against a sovereign nation by anybody. That's, speaking of values, this is also something that our founding fathers, the Washington Treaty, the foundation of this alliance is based upon. And I just cannot say how much I agree with President Connolly's presentation on this very important topic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, and for that very strong and forthright answer. Our next three questioners are Paolo Formentini of Italy, Soren Moldovan of Romania, and Utku Kariroza from Turkey. Paolo, you need to unmute.
So, Paolo, we can't hear you. While we try to get Paolo's sound, we can get the second questioner. So sorry, Moldovan.
From a very special place, Romania.
Indeed.
Yes, Soren.
We are all looking forward to the next summit of allied leaders taking place next month. So the agenda of the event is focusing on today's and tomorrow's challenges, such as Russia's aggressive actions and threat of terrorism, cyber attacks, emerging and disruptive technologies, the security dimensions of climate change, and the rise of China. Although the agenda is very comprehensive, the impact of the pandemic on the security agenda is not very clearly expressed. Though the main organization handling this subject is the World Health Organization, the input of the military, whether through MODs or NATO, was of great importance, facilitating distribution of sanitary materials and overall support for the pandemic crisis situation. Given the challenges met and tackled during this pandemic, shouldn't we include on the summit agenda a topic regarding lessons learned and possible measures to improve cooperation through allied mechanisms?
Thank you so much, Soren. Paulo, are you with us? Paulo?
No, there's still. Paulo, perhaps refresh and request the floor again, and we'll try to bring you up while we take the third question from Utku.
Okay, Utku.
Hi, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, thank you very much for the presentation. As we all know, NATO has demonstrated our collective power against extremist terrorist organizations like we did against Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Afghanistan and elsewhere. In order to defend our core values, I'm talking about democracy, rule of law, peace, security, and stability, we should focus on the root causes of how those extremist movements, terrorist organizations, gather their manpower despite our efforts. In this context, I think one of the root causes is the failure of the international community to find a fair and permanent solution to Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The tragedy is Palestinian people are suffering for decades. Israeli aggression has been one of the main abusing arguments of those extremist terrorist groups in gathering new cadres for their violent terror attacks to our civilizations. In this respect, we as NATO Parliamentary Assembly should encourage the international community to speed up their efforts to find a fair and lasting solution for this problem. In the meantime, we cannot and should not keep silent while innocent Palestinians, including children, are being killed under indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks of Israel. We, the citizens of a member state, Turkey, which is very close to the region, are gravely concerned by the recent escalation of events and violence in Palestine following the restrictions and attacks on Haram al-Sharif. The world must act to stop this Israeli aggression against unarmed civilians, including journalists and media buildings. Of course, we should condemn Hamas rockets, but we should definitely condemn the disproportionate activities of Israel. Would you agree with me that international community, and specifically our platform NATO PA, should make a call to Israel to stop these attacks, which will cause further loss of civilian lives, and to prevent settlers from entering the Holy Mosque? The international community needs to display the necessary reaction to put an end to Israel's disproportionate and indiscriminate actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Utku. Paulo, are you with us?
We'll try to bring him up, Mr. President. Let's see if this works this time.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Fine, thanks.
As they say in Latin, mirabile dictu. We can hear you.
Mirabile visu also. How can NATO contribute to China containment, according to you? We have seen recently the Royal Navy sailing towards the Indo-Pacific. We are strongly convinced the Indo-Pacific has to remain free and open. According to you, the future of democracies, of the Western democracy, will be decided in Taiwan's water? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulo, and thank you for your patience. Mr. Secretary General.
That's why I love so much engaging with the Parliamentary Assembly. All questions are right to the point and very complex. Let me start with the in the order. So in salute. Listen, the pandemic and the lessons learned from the pandemic is with us as we speak. Everything we do is a consequence of the way in which we are filtering and understanding the implications of the pandemic. But for us, the consequences of this massive global crisis are not only related to health issues or even to the indispensable role of our military colleagues in helping civilian populations all over NATO. I think we had 500,000 of our military personnel, men and women in uniform, helping medical doctors and nurses, and they were the first line of defense, and we are very grateful for that. And we do that, of course. But when we speak about the implications of the pandemic and post-pandemic to the geopolitical competition which is intensifying, to the adoption and transformation the new technologies are bringing to everything we do, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to cyber, when it comes to hybrid, when it comes to space, when it comes to the challenges to our democratic societies, that was a very present topic in our conversation today. We in NATO, we have to make sure that we bring coherence and rigorous actions in addressing all these things. So the fact that we don't have a specific lessons learned from the pandemic in the summit decisions is not meaning that we are not incorporating the lessons learned of this transformed security environment in the world in everything we do. And in a way, the pandemic was, some people call it an accelerator of trends, pre-existing trends. Some people say it was a magnifying lens to structural trends that are there. Other people say it was a major distortion of history, because we know from history that sometimes history is linear, and all of a sudden you have a big moment of trepidation, of convulsion, of shift that is curving, if you want, the trajectory of history into unexpected, uncharted territory. And that's what NATO is all about. This is, we are the alliance which is the most successful in human history. No offense to our Italian and Roman Empire. I'm also coming from that community of Neo-Latin nations in Europe. But this is the most successful alliance in history, on a serious note, just because we are always able to adapt and adjust to new situations. That's what we do. And we thank our military colleagues for showing again how indispensable they are for the well-being of our societies in crisis or in situations that we have all witnessed. When I answered, I think, on the question about our call for de-escalation and resumption of dialogue when it comes to Israel and Palestinians, let me also address the issue that you alluded when it comes to the capacity of terrorist organizations to basically adjust and look to the, if you want, the geographical evolution of terrorist movements. We started 20 years ago in Afghanistan because of the 9/11 attacks and Al-Qaeda, but you see how they are able to use sometimes very fragile states that are not in the situation to basically resist this very pervasive way of doing things. And also have to recognize that they continue to recruit, to raise money, and they are also very brutal terrorist organizations. So I think on encouraging political dialogue and addressing protracted conflicts is one important piece, but the other piece is how can we make our neighbors that are vulnerable, that are fragile, that have a resilience index, speaking of resilience, which is not very high, how can we, all of us, nationally, bilaterally, through NATO, through the EU, through whatever mechanism we can have, to strengthen these countries? Because if we don't find together a way to strengthen the capacity, national capacity of these countries to withstand the risk of terrorism, they will continue to be in a very difficult situation, and will be in a situation to be sometimes the the direction of attack of such groups. So I fully agree your concerns, but I also say that we have to look to the broader picture and try to do a better job together. And this is why in NATO 2030, speaking of Secretary General's proposals, we are putting even more ambitious interest on our partnerships with like-minded nations that share our values and strong partners, high-end, very capable partners of NATO, but also for the countries that are more fragile, that countries that need to strengthen their national security institutions. And here I think we have to do a much more, let's say, cooperative work together. And I think international cooperation in this direction is key for moving forward. Now, when it comes to China, we are not seeing China as an adversary. We're just witnessing one of the most significant shifts in human history in the last centuries. And speaking of our Italian friends, I think it's you invented in a way the Silk Road in one direction. Now it's coming back in a different direction. But the rise of China is one of the most complex shifts in geopolitics in generations. And this also brings opportunities. It's a big country, it's a big economy. There are lots of things that China is a very important player, economically, commercially, international affairs. They seem to be quite active on climate change, working together. They are an important international player. But also the rise of China is, and also the buildup in their military capabilities is of concern. And it poses also challenges, not only opportunity, but also challenges to NATO and to our interests. They're coming closer to our geography. We are not going, NATO is not becoming a global organization in terms of membership. But the rise of China is also posing significant challenges. They have today, at least in quantity, the largest fleet in the world. They have today, in quantity and quality, the second defense budget after the United States in the world. They're investing in high-end capabilities. They are now becoming very, very active and ambitious in their space programs, together with the Russians on the moon, alone on Mars. So the rise of China is both an opportunity and also a challenge. And this is why I also believe that inside NATO, we have to find a common answer to this problem. Together, NATO and EU, we have to find a way to better coordinate when it comes to the rise of China, when it comes to our infrastructures, to foreign direct investment, to telecommunications. There are things that are of concern to us. So finding the right balance between challenges and opportunities is something that all of us have to do, and this is what we do actively, including through NATO 2030.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. I understand you have a hard stop at 11:55 my time. That means if we're disciplined, maybe we can fit in one last group of 3 questions if you're amenable. Thank you so much. So the last 3 questions, unfortunately, I know there are others. We just cannot get to them because of the schedule of the Deputy Secretary, who's been very generous with his time. We have Andrea Orsini from Italy, Irakli Berea from Georgia, and Igor Cherniev from Ukraine. Andrea.
Io preferisco parlare in italiano. Mr. Secretary General, first of all, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. You quite rightly mentioned the fact that the Atlantic Alliance is an alliance which is based on shared values, not just shared interests. I'm wondering whether we should not bear this criterion in greater regard, considering the crisis in the Middle East. The crisis in the Middle East, where we have an aggressing party and an aggressed party. Israel is a free, pluralist country, and we have a religious dictatorship like Hamas. which is promoted and sponsored and armed and funded by a theocratic, aggressive country like Iran. In the Middle East, there was an important peace process underway, which I think we should also support. Don't you think that we should convince the Palestinian leadership not to stand away from this peace process, but to take part actively in this peace process? Thank you.
Our next questioner is Irakli Barat from Georgia.
Very much, dear Mr. President, dear Secretary, Deputy Secretary General. My question relates to the Black Sea security. The illegal activities of Russia in the Black Sea region in recent years, such as against Georgia and occupation of the region, the annexation of Crimea, extensive military buildup in Georgia's occupied regions, and continuous provocations in eastern Ukraine have clearly demonstrated that Euro-Atlantic security cannot be complete without secure and stable Black Sea region. We all see that the alliance has made several decisions aimed at stepping up its support to Georgia and Ukraine and its engagement in the Black Sea. However, the growing challenges require a comprehensive NATO Black Sea strategy. In this context, we wish to see more joint exercises in the Black Sea region, more frequent support visits by NATO vessels, and more practical engagements in building defense capabilities of like-minded nations in the region, including in the framework of resilience, especially in the context when the Black Sea states are facing continuous and very intensive hybrid threats from Russian Federation. Taking into account all the security challenges in the region, to what extent is the alliance considering further extending NATO presence in the Black Sea, as well as taking additional decisions to more increasingly engage, as per in Georgia and Ukraine, in the allied efforts towards strengthening Black Sea security and supporting those states? Thank you.
Thank you, Irakli. And our final questioner is Yegor Cherniev from Ukraine. Yegor, there you are.
Yegor, if you can hear us, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Dear Deputy Secretary General, dear Mr. President, first of all, thank you for your strong position about Crimea and support of Ukraine. I hope that one day we will conduct parliamentary assembly in Crimea. Ukraine highly appreciates.
Only under Ukrainian control.
Of course, only under Ukrainian control. Ukraine highly appreciates the fact that NATO member states remain committed to the Bucharest summit decision about Ukraine's and Georgia further membership in the alliance. And 7 years of ongoing armed aggression by the Russian Federation forced Ukraine to drastically and qualitatively change its armed forms. Right now, we spend over almost 6% of our GDP on the defense and national security sector to make it more closer to NATO standards. And Ukraine implements the annual national programs which cover all spheres of life. De facto, actually, this is the implementation of the map, however, as a signal of the common position of NATO members of adherence to the open doors policy, which we discussed this session also, and ignoring the influence of the Russian Federation on decision-making inside the NATO. It would be granting map to Ukraine de jure, actually. And of course, granting map, it's not a membership. It's far away from NATO membership, because we know the examples of Northern Macedonia or Montenegro, Northern Macedonia met 1999 and became a member in 2020. So therefore, we will have enough time to between receiving the map and the membership itself in order to meet all the necessary criteria. So my question about our future, about map to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you very much. When it comes to the question from our Italian colleague, that's always very important for moments of acute tension like the ones we're witnessing these days to be de-escalated, and that dialogue replaces confrontation. That's the essence of the international community. What Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, has also made. President Biden has called both sides. We also know that things are far more complex, and we always encourage political dialogue and a solution moving forward. I mentioned the partnerships that NATO has. We have a very strong partnership with Israel inside the Mediterranean dialogue process. We also witnessed some of the openings recently in some of the Arab countries when it comes to Israel. So it is very important to look to the broader situation, and we encourage de-escalation and resumption of dialogue on this very, very critical topic. Now, speaking of Georgia, Georgia is a very important partner of NATO in the Black Sea. I would say that probably it has one of the most comprehensive packages of cooperation with us. We're also very happy that also Ukraine was granted enhanced opportunity partner status for us, which is opening the way to be doing even more. I mentioned earlier that in our partnership, a new approach will be in the situation to offer even more to our partners. And of course, Georgia, Ukraine are such critical partners of NATO in the Black Sea, and they are so close to what we do. Politically speaking, I will be meeting the chairman of the Georgian parliament, I think in the next few days here in NATO headquarters. I will be also meeting again one of the deputy prime ministers of Ukraine, also here. We had Foreign Minister Kuleba just a few days after the massive buildup of Russian military presence in and around Ukraine. And I have to say that even short of MAP and fully respecting the decisions on open doors that the Bucharest summit has adopted a few years ago, look a little bit of how much the joint position of the friends and partners of Ukraine did represent during the recent Russian massive military buildup in and around your country. Look how much the unity of the political West represents in such situations. And I'm convinced that working together, continuing on the path of reforms domestically, because that's also something important. I come from a country that has been going through a very complicated process of transformations before we joined NATO and then the EU. So I think it's a matter on the one side for you to keep the pace of reforms that's indispensable not only for NATO's sake or for European Union's sake, but for your country's sake and your citizens' sake. There's no way towards prosperity and fulfillment of your dreams without a functioning economy and democratic system. Of course, NATO is an organization that works by consensus. We have to make sure that we build the political momentum around your aspirations. But speaking of Black Sea security, and now I'm answering both to our partners in Georgia and friends in Georgia and Ukraine and Georgia, you can count on us that we'll be there to support you, encourage you, and I'm convinced that as we speak about deterrence and defense in the Black Sea and in all geographies of NATO, we're not forgetting our very close partners in Ukraine and Georgia.
Mr. Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, we want to thank you for your generosity of time, your candor in responding to our many concerns and questions, and for hearing us out. We wish you every success at the summit. We regret we can't be there, but we understand in the pandemic there's limited participation and a truncated schedule. So we wish you every success and certainly stand ready to be supportive in any way, in every way we can be. Thank you so much for your time this morning and for your commitment to this transatlantic alliance. We appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I look forward, SecGen and myself, to be in person again with you. And I remember that before the pandemic, I was already on the schedule to go to Ukraine, I think, for a NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
That's right.
We are in your hands, Mr. President. We are receiving with great pleasure your leadership. And let's talk after the summit and work together. Also, Ruxandra, thank you so much for being such a formidable friend and having also this conversation. Why not stay and work together, and let's find the best possible way for our exceptional partnership. You have in me and in Jens Stoltenberg true loyal friends.
Yep, we've always appreciated the commitment, and you've never wavered from that. So we appreciate it very much. Thank you again, Mr. Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you.
Roxandra, I believe we now come to some business items. The first business item we have is the draft revised rules of procedure. And these aim primarily to change the name of our Committee on Civil Dimension of Security to the Committee on Democracy and Security, to emphasize the important link we've been talking about all morning and all weekend. The text is available under the documents icon on the right side of your screen. And I want to point out, we've discussed this multiple times. It was approved by the Standing Committee without objection, and had the support of the chairman of the committee, as well as past chairmen and rapporteurs. We believe this is a common sense kind of change. I certainly commend it to you. Roxandra, do you want to just describe how we vote on this to adopt the revised rules of procedure?
Yes, Mr. President. So we'll now be launching a poll. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a red dot showing under polls. We'll ask members to click on that. So this is again for member delegates only. Click on polls and you will see the vote now on accepting draft amendments to our rules of procedure to change the name of the Committee on the Civil Dimension of Security. And you have three options: yes, no, and abstain. The vote has started, and we're going to let members vote for 1 minute.
I have to admit, it's easy. I just voted.
Excellent. And the vote is proceeding well, so it looks like other members found it easy as well. 10 more seconds. Okay, Mr. President, so I think we can now close our vote. And I'm glad to report that the amendment to our rules of procedure was adopted with just one abstention. And I think members will now be able to see the final results as well under the results tab. So the motion is adopted.
Thank you, Roxandra. The motion is adopted. Our next business concerns the finances of the Assembly. And I call on our treasurer, Wolfgang Helmnick, to introduce the financial documents relating to our 2020 finances. Wolfgang, the floor is yours.
If we could ask the treasurer to request the floor. And hope he hasn't touched his microphone since the beginning of this meeting. Let's see. Wolfgang, can you hear us? He is here, so hopefully all is well. If not, while we locate the treasurer, Mr. President, if you would like to then move to the next item, and then we'll go back to finances while we try to see where the treasurer is.
And I should say, while we're waiting to try to get Wolfgang up, Wolfgang did make his presentation to the Standing Committee this morning, and that presentation was accepted by the Standing Committee. We will debate the budget later in the year in subsequent meetings. This is about our 2020 finances. And if Wolfgang is not available, our next item is actually to hear from our host and to hear from Karin Enström, the head of the Swedish delegation, for any concluding remarks she may have. And all of us want to thank you, Karin, for the generosity of spirit and the wonderful, warm reception you've given us virtually. And we are all saddened by the fact we can't be in Stockholm in person, but we know that at some point in the future, we're going to rectify that. Floor is yours, Karin.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. That's the most common question. But I would like to start to congratulate you, Mr. President, for your leadership during these 4 days of digital video conferences with all the technical challenges that we have met. But I must say that this has gone wonderfully well, and it has been a pleasure and an honor for the Swedish delegation to be co-hosting this very successful spring session from our point of view. And I would like also, of course, to thank my own secretariat, but especially I would like to thank Roxandra and her staff and the technical crew. They've been well, spectacular, wonderful, and very, very patient with all of us, with mics and cameras and everything that you need to arrange this kind of conference. I've tried to follow as many committee meetings as I could, and I must say that I have learned a lot from all your questions and the very good, good, not just presentations, but also very interesting reports. And I'm really looking forward to also see how far they will have come when we hopefully meet in person again in Lisbon. So even if we cannot vote on the reports and recommendations, we are engaged and think that many of them are really, really well to the point when it comes to urgency and actuality. So so many interesting and good things have been said. So I just like to, well, once again, thank you all. And I hope that, well, next time, maybe not in Stockholm, but sometime soon. And I'm really looking forward to meet you all in person. And I hope it's going to be at least in October and in Lisbon. So thank you.
Thank you. From your lips to God's ears. We hope that's true. Karin, thank you again for your hospitality and your warmth and generosity. And also thank you to your delegation and Sweden's government for the extraordinary commitment to this alliance. The partnership we've formed with Sweden is a very special one. And we look forward in coming years to deepen it and to find a full platform for the Sweden's contribution to our deliberations and our policymaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Roxandra, do we have Wolfgang?
We do.
We do. Okay. Wolfgang. Our treasurer.
I hope you can see me and can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Just as you called me, my internet was failure and breakdown. The technical situation in this room is not so good. Yes, thank you, Mr. President and dear colleagues. I can be brief. My duty is to present for adoption by the Assembly the audited financial statements of last year, my report on the 2020 surplus, and an amendment to our financial regulations. The Standing Committee approved these documents during its online meeting on 29th of March. I'm very happy that our auditors gave us a clean bill of health on our 2020 financial statements. They issued an unqualified opinion. This means that they have issued an opinion that the financial statements are stated fairly and that nothing has come to their attention that causes them to believe that funds have not been properly used for the settlement of authorized expenditure or are not in compliance with the rules and regulations. Because of COVID-19, we could not meet in person for almost all of 2020. As a result, the 2020 surplus is exceptionally high, close to 728,000 euros. The Standing Committee agreed that we should use these savings to be better prepared the Assembly for the future, modernize the Assembly's processes and tools, and shield us against catastrophic financial contingencies in the future. The Standing Committee therefore approved to allocate the surplus in three ways: to update the 2021 budget, to add money to the provisions, and to add money to the emergency reserve fund. You can find all the details in my report under the documents. To add the proposed amount to the emergency reserve fund, we need to raise its ceiling from 25% to up to 40% of the total national contributions to the budget of the current financial year. As recommended by the auditors, I provided a detailed explanation to the Standing Committee for why we need to do this. This is included in my report. This is why I'm now asking you to approve amendments to the financial regulations to augment the ceiling of the emergency fund to 40% and make the current 25% the new minimum. Regarding the provisions, the auditor suggested that in the future, the Assembly develops a formal strategic plan for the use of our provisions and regularly updates the plan. That is an excellent suggestion, which I will address when we discuss the results of our 2021 finances. Let me end with one final update. As in previous years, the Assembly received funding from the Swiss Ministry of Defense for our outreach activities in 2020, as well as a subsidy from the NATO. You can see the details on page 7 of the financial statements. Let me take this opportunity to thank both the Swiss Ministry of Defense and NATO for their continued support. In closing, I hope that the Assembly will adopt these financial documents. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Wolfgang. And just to be clear, we were audited and there were no problems identified in terms of our financial transactions, activities, or reporting. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's right.
And secondly, with respect to the reserve we're talking about, this is, we believe, a one-time surplus because of the pandemic. And even with this action, some of our sister organizations have this level of reserve or higher traditionally. Is that correct?
Das stimmt. Ich antworte jetzt mal auf Deutsch.
That is correct. I will be answering in English. We usually have higher provisions, and that's why the proposal was that if we look at the financial result of 2021, as soon as we have that available, the Standing Committee will discuss the steps forward.
Letztendlich gefordert. Konkrete Plan wird auch das weitere Vorgehen beinhalten, wenn wir ein geprüftes Ergebnis haben. Erst dann können wir über die Zukunft sprechen.
We can only talk about the future when we have the finally audited financial statements, and we do not yet have that for the financial year 2021, but the proposals contain the possibility to also pay back to the individual members on their contributions, but that's something we can only decide next year.
So the motion before us we're going to vote on is a very simple motion. It is to adopt and approve the financial documents as Wolfgang described them that have been reviewed by auditors and by the Standing Committee and discussed in the past. And it is with respect to 2020, not 2021 or our future budget. That is the motion. And Roxandra, let's open the vote.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The vote is now open for members under the polls icon on the right-hand side of your screen. Same thing, it says financial documents, very clear, and you have the option yes, no, abstain. And we'll leave the vote open for 1 minute. So 10 more seconds. Okay, so our vote is now closed and we will publish the results, and I'm glad to report that the motion was adopted with just 1 abstention.
Thank you, Alexandra. And again, thank you, Wolfgang, for all of your hard work. We appreciate it. Look forward to further conversations about our finances as we move forward during uncertain times, including a pandemic. Our final business is to hear from the head of the Portuguese delegation, where we all hope we will be come this fall in person. Bring us good luck. Ada Silva, you are recognized. And I know you have a video too.
So we're bringing Adele on screen. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Mr. Silva again, sorry. Yeah, if you could request the floor again, and we'll bring you back. Okay, it seems to be a bit of a delay. We're getting there.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I suppose everybody is very tired after these 4 days of hard work. Congratulations anyway for that. As you know, dear friends, Lisbon will be hosting the 2021 annual session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, due to take place on 8 to 11 October 2021. It is our sincere hope to be able to welcome you in Lisbon for the annual session 2021 in order to debate and exchange on the challenges posed to the Euro-Atlantic security and to further strengthen the transatlantic bond. I hope it can also be an opportunity not only to address the constant evolving challenges, but also for you to enjoy our beautiful city of Lisbon. And today, Lisbon is very beautiful indeed, with a lot of shining light. Let me now present you the video of the session as a way of introduction to our meeting in October. I really hope you enjoy. Thank you very much, Garrett. Thank you very much, all our colleagues.
Bem-vindos a Portugal, bem-vindos a Lisboa. O meu nome é Adão Silva, sou presidente da delegação da Assembleia Parlamentar da NATO e quero dizer-vos que tenho muito gosto e muita honra em receber-vos em Portugal. Desejo que a vossa estadia em Lisboa seja um momento feliz, não apenas para poderem desfrutar da luz de Lisboa, a tão celebrada luz de Lisboa, mas também para, pessoalmente, presencialmente, podermos debater os temas da paz, da segurança, do desenvolvimento, que estão inerentes à Aliança Atlântica, à NATO, que todos nós defendemos conjuntamente.
A situação pandémica que atualmente vivemos trouxe novos desafios a juntar aos já existentes e que nenhum parceiro pode enfrentar sozinho. É, pois, essencial uma unidade de esforço e o reafirmar do compromisso com os valores democráticos. O reforço das relações transatlânticas é fundamental para fazer face às ameaças e riscos securitários e pedra angular de paz e estabilidade num laço estratégico que une os dois lados do Atlântico. Encontramos-nos num importante momento da Aliança Atlântica na adaptação para o futuro. Salientamos a importância do diálogo político e o papel fundamental da Assembleia Parlamentar da NATO neste processo como fórum privilegiado para o debate das questões de segurança e defesa da Aliança. Portugal tem uma vertente continental europeia, mas a sua história e a extensão da sua área de responsabilidade oceânica impulsionam-nos para a defesa intransigente da indispensabilidade do elo transatlântico. Portugal orgulha-se de ser membro fundador da Aliança Atlântica, de ser um parceiro empenhado na contribuição para a defesa coletiva, na gestão de crises e na segurança cooperativa, encontrando-se solidamente implantado nas estruturas da Aliança. Em Portugal encontram-se presentes diferentes estruturas da NATO, relevando, entre outras, a recente NATO Sea Academy. Reflexo da materialização dos interesses nacionais no âmbito dos compromissos assumidos, as Forças Armadas de Portugal estão empenhadas no mar, em terra, no ar e no ciberespaço ao serviço de missões da NATO e das organizações internacionais que Portugal integra, contribuindo para a segurança e a paz no mundo. Enquanto país euroatlântico, acreditamos numa aliança forte e preparada para, em cooperação com a União Europeia, responder aos desafios e às ameaças em constante evolução.
Nos últimos anos, temos assistido a um aumento das ameaças sobre o espaço euroatlântico. Essas ameaças são cada vez mais fortes e são cada vez mais numerosas. E compete aos parlamentares empenharem-se no reforço do elo euroatlântico.
All right, Roxandra, I think there's a unanimous vote that we expect you to cancel the pandemic and get us to Portugal. A very inviting video and very engaging. Thank you so much to our Portuguese friends and delegation. And again, our business is done here today. I want to thank our interpreters, our Swedish hosts, led by the very able Karen Enstrom, and the full Swedish delegation. I also want to thank all of our rapporteurs and presenters and committee chairs. I had the opportunity to go to every committee for at least some period of time, and I was really struck with how substantive and penetrating the reports were. And I think that's a real testament, especially during a pandemic. And of course, I want to thank Roxandra and the International Secretariat, all of your wonderful colleagues, Roxandra, for not only this 4-day meeting, but frankly, for getting us through an unprecedented experience, the pandemic. We haven't missed a beat, and we've hit all of our targets and goals, and we have run as if not much had changed. And that's a huge testament to you and the incredible, able and committed staff we are so privileged to be served by. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing everybody at the annual session in October in Lisbon, hopefully in person. I declare the spring session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly closed.
Thank you.